it is Friday. I am wearing my Argo red out for Friday still. Just makes me feel good to be able to do so. But I want to talk to you all about Lincoln's second inaugural address. This assignment is due this Sunday in Google Classroom, so I'm going to go over it with you in this video. Also, if you have not checked Google Classroom, I put a lot of announcements on there this morning. Make sure you check it. Make sure you follow those announcements and do that. And everything I ask you to do is really, really simple. And also keep in mind that, I know this is new, so we're just going as we can go. For those of you who may not know, this is my online junior English class during the COVID-19 quarantine, where we have moved all instruction online. So what I'm going to do is get straight into Lincoln's second inaugural address, and then any announcements that I have for you and about your tests will be at the end. So make sure that you stay to the end so you know what you need to know for your tests. All right, so here we are on page 279, Lincoln's inaugural address. Just quickly, for those of you who may not know how to get to Lincoln's inaugural address or get to your textbook, make sure that you go to your dashboard. You are going to go here and make sure it says grade 11. It always defaults at grade 10, so move to grade 11, and then I am clicking on your student ebook that is right here. So we're going to get started with the second inaugural address, and I just want to point out before we begin the time period. So we're already in the Civil War. Lincoln has already issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and now he has been reelected to his second term, and he is addressing the nation. This speech is given on March 4th, 1865, less than 6 weeks before he was actually assassinated. And I want you to just think about the energy of that time. Like, everybody's just kind of wondering, like, oh, what's the president going to say? And they had their own expectations of what they felt the president was going to talk about. Many people felt that he was going to address the victory, that the North won the war over the South. While the war wasn't over, a lot of people kind of can see how it was going to end. It was predicted that the North was going to win at this time. So people thought that he was going to address that. Also, we were in the Reconstruction era that actually started a few years prior. Actually, it started in December of 1863, and it went on to March 1877. So they're thinking maybe he's going to set up the rules and administration policy of the Reconstruction era, which is basically a time period where it's now, how do we help the South get back on their feet? And how do we help the South now that the war is over? How do we rebuild the South? So they thought that he was going to talk about that. What I want you to do is really pay attention and investigate. What does he really say? What does he really talk about? Because what our expectations and what is actually said may not be the same thing. What's interesting about what we're experiencing now is that if you've watched the governor on television, or if you watch the president, which it seems like at least one of them are on television every day now, we go to watch it with our own anticipation and expectations of what we think is going to happen. But at the end of the day, they're going to tell us what they want to tell us. So you're going to pay attention to what Lincoln is telling the audience in his address, and what is the purpose of his address, and then 3, his call to action. So the information he gives, the purpose behind that information, and his call to action.
Second Inaugural Address. Speech by Abraham Lincoln. Fellow countrymen, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then a statement, somewhat in detail, of course to be pursued, seemed fitting and proper. Now, at the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish.
All right, so I want to draw your attention to this highlighted area here. All right, so you click and drag, right? You open up add a note and you hit save. So that's how you're going to highlight. All right, so what he does is that he refers back to his first inaugural address that happened right in the same spot. And many of the people who are standing here today, they stood there 4 years ago. And he basically gets them to think and to compare where the nation was 4 years ago to where it is now. And so he points out some things. He says, well, 4 years ago, the address was about saving the Union without war. Insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war. I love how he repeats without war, without war. I want to get it through to the audience that it was never our intention as the North to go to war. We was here 4 years prior, making sure that we were going to do this without war. Then this statement here is really interesting too, because I like how he is trying to unify both the North and the South. He's not, yes, he's, the leader of the Union, commander in chief, but he's saying, no, we both did not want war. We were both, had a lot of the same values and the same desires. We're actually a lot alike. But then he causes for a separation. So if you look at this last line here, he says, but one of them will make war rather than let the nation survive. And then he says, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. So what you need to know is who was the one that actually made the war, and then who was the one that accepted the war. So what are your choices? Well, your choices are the North and the South, because there are only two ways that the country was divided. So you remember we talked about this in class. Look and pay attention to who your historical figures are and who some of the other historical figures were in the class, or those notes, those Cornell notes that that were assigned, because you should know how the war started, when the war started, and who started the war. Okay. And then I like this line here. He says, and the war came, like a breeze, like a nice summer breeze. It just came. He didn't say, and so we went and we did this. No, the war came. It wasn't us. The war just came. So just really good writing on Lincoln's behalf, which is now why it's part of the book and of our curriculum. All right, so let's continue.
And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was, somehow, the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union, even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before, the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph, and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
All right, so let's go back. Actually, I am going to start at line 41. So let's take a look here. So keep in mind that Lincoln's purpose of giving the speech is to try to unite both the North and the South, to reunite the nation. The war is practically over. It's going to be over soon. So now what's going to happen afterwards? How are we going to all get along, so to speak? So that's his purpose. So he's trying to find what is a commonality that I can use that both the North would agree with and the South would agree with. And you guessed it, it's religion. So make sure that you write that down in your notes and you know that he's going to use God. And so that's what he's doing in 41 when he talks about slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove. So, yes, he's like, there was a time where God allowed slavery or God allowed this. And now it comes a time where God is saying he's not allowing this anymore and he's putting a stop to it. So, Lincoln's scorer kind of saying, it's not me. I know like the Emancipation Proclamation happened a year ago, but see, this is God's will. It's God's will because the war actually happened. And it's God's will because the North is winning and the North is going to win. So God is saying that this slavery should be over with now. So you agree with God and they agree with God. So let's just all agree. You know, that's this whole point of this inaugural address is to unify the nation. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. Let's all unite as we go forward. So here, Lincoln, what he normally does, he's really known for using parallel structure in his speeches. And so he says, fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. And it sounds poetic. And a lot of times when you use parallel structure, and then there's also this rhyme scheme that's here, pray, may, away, it becomes just an example of good writing. So lastly, I want to point out here is this last paragraph. This last paragraph, I think we're going to give it a different color. So let's go green. So this last paragraph here is Lincoln's call to action. It's going to be very important for you to know what is his call to action to the crowd? Like, what does he want them to do going forward? And you're going to find that information here. That's the things that you're going to need to know for your test. Also, we are getting together on Google Meetups this Monday, and I'm going to go to Google Classroom and ask you, or even on this video, I'm trying to get a sense of what time you want to meet up. I'm going to do my best to record the actual session. So if you don't get a chance to meet up and you want to watch the replay later, you'll be able to, but I've never done that before. So since I've never done that before, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. So in closing, let's do a recap on what it is that you need to know for next week's test on the on Lincoln's second inaugural address. All right, this feels like a lot of talking. All right, so one, the listeners' expectations. So, what were the people in the audience expecting to hear from Lincoln, and then what did they actually hear from Lincoln? You should know the Reconstruction era, not the dates because this isn't history, but I mean, if you see something that says Reconstruction era, then you should know what it's referring to. What were Lincoln's expectations for his audience? So we just talked about, well, what was the audience's expectations for Lincoln, but now what is Lincoln's expectations for his audience? So let's make sure that we have that as well. So most people could agree with the angle that Lincoln took. So he took basically like ethical appeal. He tapped into their morals, their beliefs, their desires, and the shared religion amongst the North and the South, amongst the slave and the free, amongst the abolitionists as well as the slave owner. Like, how are they all united? And they are united through religion. Everyone had a very similar religion. And so Lincoln knew that and he capitalized on that. So you need to know his persuasive strategy and argument. And then lastly, can you restate Lincoln's call to action in your own words? What was his call to action? Can you do that in your own words? And then on Monday, when we meet live in our Google Meetup, I want to have a discussion. I want you to be able to basically talk about what was America like 4 years ago and what is America like during his actual inaugural address. And he talks about that. When I stood here in the same spot, during the first inaugural address, we weren't even at war yet. We were trying to do this without going to war. We didn't want war. War came. So you need to be able to do that compare and contrast. Also, we'll do open discussion, maybe comparing and contrasting our experiences listening to I guess we listened to it. We listened to the audio. So listening to Lincoln give this address to people when the Civil War was almost over with, compared to how we are now in quarantine school, listening to the governor or our president daily to get information, and how we have our expectations of what we are listening for the president to say, and then we have the reality of whatever the president or the governor or whoever's going to speak their report. So this is just all for discussion. You don't have to write this down. You do not have to take a picture. You do not have to send it to me. This is part of the online discussion. If you are not here to verbally participate in that discussion, then you are going to have to write down your comment in that discussion. But I think it would be really fun if you can to come so you can actually interact with your classmates live, and you can choose to be seen or you can choose not to be seen. But either way, we'll know you're present and you'll be able to talk and not write. So I'm thinking that may be an incentive for you. I am going to ask, just kind of give you some time frames, like, oh, should this be at 10, 12, or 2? Like, what time do you think that you can get here on Monday so we can have that conversation? And then if you have any questions also about second inaugural address or Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which is the other assignment, I extended that assignment to Monday, 11:59 p.m., Google Classroom, but there is no test on the Emancipation Proclamation. You need to know what it is, but there's no test on that. So you don't have to worry about a test on that. Just a summative experience for Lincoln's second inaugural address. So I think this is it for today's lesson. You can replay this, you can take notes, you can come with your questions, but I do look forward to hanging out with you all in Google Meets. You have Google Meets. It's in your ggusd.net account. So you just click on it. I'm going to send you a link anyway. And I'll see you Monday, and have a good weekend. Bye.